Okay, so is this a real fight or are we just bickering for the podcast, so the audience thinks we're bickering?
If you have to ask, then...
Okay then. Well, maybe I just explain the show now. We're married. We work together. We very rarely fight. But when we do, it's really only for the podcast, and it's only about PR and marketing. The rest of the stuff, that's just an act, right?
Yeah, that's it. Has nothing to do with reality, but sure.
All right.
It's a good script.
Let's start the show anyway.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Mark with the Bickersteins.
In this episode, Kathy's favorite topic, people who do really good work, nonprofits, also money.
Ooh, you mean spending money, right? Because that is my forte.
No, we're raising money for charity. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, fine. That also is something I really like. So we do have a great guest who is going to give us all the inside secrets about fundraising. So joining us today is Ben Chambers.
Ben's a forward-thinking fundraiser and nonprofit leader at Team Cat and Mouse in St. Louis. He trains fundraisers to have sustainable strategies in order for them to do their best work. He is also an expert in research, political strategy, and community outreach. I don't know why he's hanging with us today, because he's really punching below his weight here.
Well, thanks so much, Ben. We're excited to talk to you and learn from you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the chance to be here, and I'm excited that you all are talking about this today. It's such an important subject, and it's good to start a dialogue about it.
All right, so we heard the fancy introduction, but in simple terms, explain to us what you do.
Yeah, so I work with organizations to help them come up with fundraising strategies to sustain their mission and then to grow their impact. So you think about all the phenomenal nonprofit organizations out there. It's a real struggle a lot of times. You can have a great mission, you can have a great vision, but then you got to have money to make it happen. And so my focus is working with organizations to, first of all, help them figure out what those strategies are for them and what they need to do to hit their financial goals. But then more importantly, to give them the tools to continue doing that over the long term, so that as a consultant at some point, when they need to move on from me, they'll be able to keep raising money, that they get taught how to do the things you need to do to fund yourself on a consistent basis. And that's a real challenge in the nonprofit field, because you've got a lot of people who get into the work because they know the programs, because they know the mission, but nobody really goes to college to learn how to fundraise. Outside of a few programs scattered around the country, a lot of people get into it sort of by accident. So giving people the training that they need, that they can go do that and build organizations that are going to see that consistent growth that we hope to see.
So you teach them how to fish?
Exactly.
Don't you want to be on the payroll for the rest of forever with them though?
My philosophy is that if we do good work, if we teach people how to fish, that good will keep happening to us, because our goal isn't to create dependency. We want healthy, vibrant nonprofit organizations and communities around the country. And if we're doing that, we know the good's going to keep coming.
I would think a lot of this would be almost psychology that you have to know, because you have to think about what makes people want to give money, and sometimes give money in bad times, right? And sometimes bad times is when people open up their pocketbooks the most, even if they don't have the money to give. So who right now is donating to nonprofits? Why? Is this a seasonal thing, or do you have to have that sense of urgency?
I think Kathy's saying, teach us to fish.
Teach us to fish. How do I cast my line?
I appreciate the way you framed that question, because you hit on a lot of important things. So anytime is a good time to fundraise, and most people are charitable at some level. The most recent statistic I saw was that last year, 73% of adults gave to charity at some point over the course of the year. So you've got the majority of people out there are charitable at some level.
Was that up from other years? I mean, during COVID, 73%?
I don't know how that compares to the past, but I will say anecdotally, and I don't have data about this, but just what I've seen in my work is that most organizations saw an increase in the number of people giving, but a drop in the size of gifts. So people recognize the just incredible need that exists right now. So name your area: health, food insecurity, housing, anything like that. but people are also going through hardship and have less to give. So there is kind of that community effect of people want to do what they can, even if what they can isn't as much as what they could have at points in the past. But urgency really, and especially this last year, is something that has driven a lot of giving. Is organizations have talked about specifically what they're trying to do to address the crisis. Because when people see, hey, this group is out here really leaning into something that I know is an issue in the community, that's when they really have that inclination to get involved and make a difference. It used to be that a lot of giving kind of clustered around the end of the year for tax purposes. Everyone would want to give that last week of December so they could have that write-off when they do their taxes in a few months. With the changes in tax laws a few years ago, you still have your major donors, people giving thousands of dollars who have to consider that. But with the vast majority of people taking the standard deduction, it does open it up for more giving to happen over the course of the year. So organizations can really set up campaigns and appeals in a way that isn't tied to those sorts of considerations, and instead recognizes community need and highlights what they're doing to get in there and address that need.
Did you notice, like, after those laws were changed, was there a dip? Did that really change donations? Because first of all, I think that was terrible. I mean, the nonprofits must have been very sad about that. But I mean, why can't you write off things that you give? Doesn't that give incentive to give more? But anyway, did that impact you? Or not you, but your organizations?
Well, it's a great question, because when the tax laws changed, I was still working at a nonprofit, and it was a large membership-driven nonprofit. We didn't see too big of a drop-off, actually. There was a lot of concern in the field about it. But the thing that I think really changed things is people can still write them off. They just, have to itemize their deductions. And if you're filing jointly, the standard deduction is now $24,000. So your average donor typically isn't hitting that bar, but your major donor still is. So it's still, those big gifts that are really moving the needle. It hasn't really affected that much because they do still have that as a consideration. So, but for the rest of us, who are giving smaller amounts, maybe spreading them out a little bit, it didn't really seem to cause too big of a shift. And there are people at other organizations I know have seen it, so I can only speak to what I've witnessed myself. We've definitely adapted now. We're years removed from the tax changes, and I think organizations have pretty much rolled that into their strategies.
Since we're a PR and marketing company, I mean, I guess a lot of this is getting the word out. So
yeah.
How best to get the word out? I know there's not one magic potion, but I mean, in the bag of tricks, what do people do right and what do people do wrong?
Well, I think you hit on the big point, which is there is no one thing that works. The most important thing when you're doing a fundraising campaign is to leverage every channel you have available. So social media, email, for some people that's direct mail. It still works, but I think over the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to really lose impact for the nonprofit space. But then combining that with as much one-on-one outreach as you possibly can. The most effective thing that will ever drive donations is one person saying to their peer, their friend, their family, whoever, hey, this cause is important to me. Would you consider joining me and making a gift? Like, far and away, that is always going to drive the most giving, because when you get an appeal in the mail, when something hits your inbox, when you see something on social media, it can tug on the heartstrings, but there's a lot of things competing for attention. We all know that, I was on Facebook earlier today, and who knows how many separate pieces of information I consumed. And even if one left its mark on me in the moment, it didn't move me to do anything other than maybe hit the like button or something like that. So those channels serve to reinforce a message, to raise community awareness, to let people know that this is going on. And then when you get that call from that person, be they a volunteer, board member, another donor, that's when it's like, oh yeah, I'm in, I'll do that. And I've had a lot of success doing peer-to-peer campaigns that are really driven on that, where organizations find their champions, their board, their volunteers, their staff, and they get those people out there working the phones, making calls, and doing that within their own network. So it isn't strangers they're calling, it's their friends, their families, their business contacts, everyone within their network, and expanding their tent in that way. And that, when those things work synergistically, that's when you really have the ingredients for a successful campaign.
So you know what I've been reading lately? My number one source of news.
I read an article the other day about plastic clothing. We're all wearing it and it's bad for the ocean. So go check out 1631digitalnews.com. That's where you're going to find the latest and most important real news that can impact your life.
It's your go-to source for the latest headlines, interviews, in-depth stories. Like Kathy said, from a short list of trusted media partners. Check it out at 1631digitalnews.com. That's 1631digitalnews.com. So the social media is for the branding and the mailing list, whatever, to make sure they know what you're doing, keep them apprised, and be first on their front of mind. So the devil's in the details, though, when you talk about calling people one-on-one. You got to get them on the cell. You got to get them, to answer the phone. Yeah, not go to voicemail. And how do you get them? How do you get them to? I mean, and it's not even write a check anymore. Do you just ask? I mean, I know this is getting really into the weeds on this, but do you get them to Venmo you money? I mean, what's?
Well, so the best thing, and I say the phone, texting is a really powerful tool. Also, when you're talking about peer-to-peer. So if I want my friends to give, I hardly ever call my friends. We text. So I would send them a text and here's a link, click here, make that gift online, make it easy. But I always encourage people too, that it's an intimidating process. Asking for money is something that most people hear about and they kind of their heart rate goes up, that anxiety level starts to creep up. And I like to remind people that you're not calling about their cable package. You're not telemarketing. It's a heart to heart thing about, I care about this. I'm doing something. Do you want to join me? And the worst answer you could ever get is a very polite no. Because if someone can't give, they're going to tell you that, but they're not going to be mad at you for asking to give to a food bank or to give to name your cause, name your organization that's doing something good in the community.
Or they'll just ghost you.
Yeah, and that's a possibility too. That happens, and you got to be okay with that. But you're never going to get the angry response.
I saw just earlier today, I had a friend post and said, hey, it's my birthday. I see a lot of these and I would think these would be effective. This is an important cause to me. If you have a moment and an extra $5 to donate to this cause, I'm trying to raise $300 for my birthday or whatever it may be. Help me reach my goal to those kind of peer-to-peer, I think would be less intimidating for people, just regular, not professional fundraisers, but just your average Joes out there. And if you get enough people doing that kind of thing, is that the type of peer-to-peer that seems to be really effective?
Definitely. I confess I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook fundraisers because they raise a lot of money. I've done them myself. I put them on my feed and they've, it's really easy to quickly raise $500 or $1,000 for something. The hang up is, having worked at a nonprofit, Facebook pretty closely guards the data it gets from those. So most gifts come in anonymously. So you'll get this nice check in the mail, and half the time it's hard to find out who even did the fundraiser so you can thank them. And as a nonprofit, you get those smaller gifts. And the most important thing is the money, because truly every dollar counts for an organization. But the secondary benefit is you can then start a relationship with those donors. It could be someone gave $5, but now there's someone who you can invite to events, you can send a newsletter to. And maybe that's someone who's just out of college now and barely has $10 to their name, but 20, 25 years from now, when they're established, if you've developed that relationship the right way, maybe that's someone who makes a more significant investment in your organization down the road. So that piece makes those challenging, but there are other platforms out there. And the one I particularly am drawn to is one called Charity, which is CHARIDY. I always have to clarify that. It does the same kind of thing where it's a social platform and people can set their own goals. They can put their own teams together. They can make like a fun competition among themselves and their friends, and people respond to that. I've never seen one of those campaigns not hit their goals. And those are ones where if an organization sets it up, they can, if they execute the right way and they put in the planning work necessary, can raise in excess of six figures doing those. Leveraging the psychology of the peer-to-peer thing, but doing it in a way that lets organizations then develop those donors as stakeholders and people who have an affinity for their cause over the long term, kind of gets you the best of both worlds.
So is Charity with a D, is that a different platform that, let's say I'm United Way, or I don't know,
or GoFundMe or Kickstarter?
Just wait. Before we get there, do they have to belong to Charity and then you turn around and then also promote this charity competition or whatever on your social media platforms? Because if I don't know Charity from Adam, right? Then,
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so it's a service that organizations pay for. So a percentage of the money they raise in the day of their campaign ends up going back to essentially pay for their use of the platform. So then charity sets up a website. They help provide some marketing materials. They sort of coach you on how to get your team together, how to recruit volunteers, how to get them to recruit donors. Then you set a time period, usually 24 to 48 hours. And you say, we've got this goal, we've got to hit it by this time. Help us get there. And you push those links out on social media to your email list. And then when people click into that page that charity has set up for you, they can see your live progress over the course of the day. And they see their name pop up and what they've contributed, and they can see the little thermometer go up as they give over the course of the campaign. It's a product they set up, but it's one that's pretty accessible to organizations.
Basically, charity is unlike Facebook. Why it's advantageous would be because you get to collect the information. You're building a community. You're collecting emails, so you can constantly keep in touch with people.
Exactly. And if you're doing it right, you thank them right after the gift. You continue to update them on what you're doing with the gifts. So, you send out maybe quarterly an email celebrating, we did all of this, or we helped so many people, and thanks to our donors for helping us make this happen. And really show the love, show what they're helping you do. It's not just that they're throwing money into the pile, but it's really investing in something that's having an impact in people's lives. And then as you go forward, as those campaigns happen in the future, hopefully their affinity only increases, and they not only keep giving, but then they kind of evangelize what you're doing, and they bring their friends and their community, and the snowball keeps rolling over time.
So you have to continue to care and feeding and love. And will those be your best contributions from people who you get them in the door and then you keep care and feeding them?
Or will they get annoyed? Can you care and feed them too much where they're like, okay, I donated once, but my gosh, we're not like married or anything.
You can definitely overdo it.
For the moment. I'm looking at the clock. Hold on a second.
It depends on your donation level.
And right.
The donations really are high.
Amazon is looking for contributions again.
Yeah, you can definitely overdo it, but it's hard to overdo it with basic stewardship of thanking, reporting back. I like to think a good, healthy stewardship plan for an organization, they should be thanking or giving some kind of update quarterly, if not monthly. More than monthly might get to be a little bit much, but that's to say that's not asking. That's just putting information out there, giving updates, letting them know as stakeholders that they, it's for the best that they learn what's going on. And it's a real struggle for a lot of organizations because fundraising teams are stretched pretty thin. A lot of times you just have one person, maybe two people overseeing, could be 7 figures in revenue. And finding the time to send those newsletters, to be in front of people, to put those messages out there, it can be a challenge. So finding ways to automate it as much as possible and to come up with just that consistent thing you can do to be in front of people, not asking, but thanking, reporting, because renewal rates tend to be pretty low. Nonprofits on average, it's rare to see organizations that have 50% renewal rates of donors. So if you give 1 year, odds are you're not going to give in year 2. And it's like that old sales adage that, it's cheaper to keep a customer than to go find a new one. It's the same deal with fundraising. It's easier to renew an existing donor than to go find a new one. So those are kind of the tools that help get that renewal rate up a little bit higher, where we would hope to see it. That's going to drive long-term growth.
So it sounds to me like one of the most important things is to get that initial main stakeholders who are not like with the company or with the nonprofit, let's say. They care about this. This is deeply personal to them. But how do you get those? Like, and how many do you need? Let's say you're a big, Feed America. I have no idea if that's even an organization or some COVID relief, organization that maybe a church started or something. How do you get those initial and find those initial people who are passionate about this enough to do the charity things and then reach out to all their friends and say, that's important to me? Is that something where you're mining for people, or do you find them? Do you figure out a way for them to find you? Like, how does that work?
Right. The biggest thing that an organization can do initially is to make sure it's growing its board of directors, because those are the people who are kind of your primary advocates. So those people who are in high profile positions in the community or subject matter experts whose names pack a lot of punch, you can sit down with someone and say, hey, I got involved in this. I'd love to have you get involved too. And then That's how you build that initial base of people who are influential, who know people in the community, who can help raise your profile and build your brand. And then just doing all those basic things you talk about from a marketing standpoint, getting out there, of doing the social media, trying as hard as you can to get yourself on radio and TV and print, getting that kind of publication in the community, just so people have some kind of awareness of who you are and that you're trying to make a difference with something.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that, because with the nonprofits that we've worked with, getting them in the media seems to be, I mean, it's kind of a sugar rush.
Yeah.
It's a good rush though. I mean, it's a good sugar rush. And then it does lead to continued relationships. But so you find that to be helpful, maybe not the golden bullet.
Yeah, it's definitely not the one thing. I should add to trying to be present in the community and to have events that get you face to face with people. So whether it's, showing up at some kind of, maybe it's a health fair if you're a health focused organization, or education events if you're an education organization. And then, is it 5K you do? Is it an annual gala? Is it a trivia night or a bar crawl, or just something, being mindful that you don't want to overdo it, because you can really burn people out on events and you can really put too many organizational resources in them. But having those chances that you can bring people together and then be face to face with them and share what it is you're doing. Because if you're doing it right, a lot of relationships will come out of a well executed event.
So you mentioned charity, obviously, but what about sites like Mark had mentioned earlier, GoFundMe or Kickstarter? Is that for just, the person who, had a personal tragedy and then the other person in their life is trying to raise money for them? Or is that something that an organization should think about using?
Yeah, I think you're right with individuals. Kickstarter and GoFundMe and those are a great way to raise a lot of money quickly, but they take a really high percentage of what you raise. And so for an organization, you're likely going to be reaching the same people if you use GoFundMe or Kickstarter as you would if you used another platform. So typically it's not going to be advantageous, just because that I think it's 20%. Don't quote me on that, but it's a pretty hefty fee they take out of there for something that I don't think the platform itself really drives that much giving. I think it works for individuals because, it isn't that I'm excited I see somebody has a campaign on GoFundMe. It's I see someone I know and care about has experienced some kind of hardship and I want to help them. So GoFundMe becomes the vehicle for that. So I wouldn't advise organizations to use those most of the time.
We're talking with nonprofit fundraising expert Ben Chambers about what every organization should and should not do to increase donations. What have you seen that you thought would really work and didn't, or something that really surprised you that you didn't expect it to work?
Wow, that's a great question. With the one that I didn't expect to work but does, I'll be honest, it's the peer-to-peer stuff. It's when I first started doing this, that was really in its infancy. And the first time I heard about it, I kind of had that reaction of yeah, we'll see. Then I started seeing it work for other organizations, and it's really something that's taken off. And especially as millennials are getting older, as attitudes about giving are changing, as people's preferred ways to give are changing, I think that's really in line with where the donors of the future are. And I didn't fully expect. On the flip side, what always surprised me when I first got into this was that social media alone is not always an effective driver of giving. It helps. It's important. It's something that you have to have as part of it. But if an organization just goes out and posts on Facebook, we need people to give, nobody's ever going to respond. And I've done large campaigns. I used to work in the world of public media where you had the big 9-day long pledge drives. And
those are my favorite. Yeah.
Oh, they're the best. Everybody loves them. Everybody's so excited when the
I can't get enough tote bags at all. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Everybody's got a closet full of them. And, people responded to direct mail. They responded we even did telemarketing, which is very uncommon in the nonprofit space. People responded to it, but you would put the social media link out there and people didn't click the link to give. But we found that when we reinforced email campaigns, for instance, with social media, when we targeted a social media post to the people receiving the email, we saw higher response rates on the email, which was interesting. And I think it really points to social media. It's hard to have the emotional resonance to get someone to give in a quick period of time, because who knows how many pieces of information they consume in a minute scrolling through Facebook. But it registers on some level because then something hits their inbox and it isn't coming in cold, they're like, oh yeah, I saw that earlier on Facebook. And then you get that second message, and maybe that's what sort of pushes them over the tipping point. So just with a social media driven as our media climate is right now, I thought it would be a silver bullet, and it's not. It's more it's an indispensable tool, but it's something that's only effective if it's mixed with other things.
So you would say peer-to-peer is the way to go. And then these social media, email, public relations, those are all things that like spotlight and basically amplify, but really
Yeah,
it's that personal connection and personal story, and that will be the best, most successful driving factor.
absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it. Absolutely
Okay.
right.
And tote bags. Don't forget the fresh air
And
tote
yeah,
bags.
don't forget the tote
Yeah.
bags.
Yeah. So another question I had is just if you were to, so during COVID this last year, and you're talking about events, was but oddly enough, more people were giving smaller amounts, but with the whole everything switching to virtual, was that a lot harder? And if you're in that, let's say, God forbid, hopefully not, knock on wood, but let's say COVID starts to get worse and things start to, close up a bit. We're all excited to get out and do anything. I'll go to any charity event that anybody invites me to. I need to get out. Right. But how would you say, like with the online, creating that online community, was that particularly challenging to try to get face to face with people when it's really Zoom,
Yes, it was the biggest challenge I can ever imagine the fundraising sector facing, because so much of our work does happen face to face. It's sitting down across the table over coffee with a donor and really connecting with them, or it's having that gala or that fundraising event, pulling people together and having that feeling of collective impact when everyone's in the room. And we had to find ways to recreate that feeling online. I was working for an organization last year where we did a virtual gala, which didn't raise as much money as we're used to. Yeah, that's kind of what comes along with it. You don't have people dressed up in fancy dresses and the open bar and everything,
drinking and donating more.
Drinking. Yeah,
Well, wait, everybody's home. It's easier. They don't have to schlep. They don't have to park. They can dress up at home.
There's competition.
They may
You're
still be
drinking,
drinking at
they
home.
can
You don't
drink
know.
at home.
auctioning, you're doing the silent auction, you're bidding, you're competing.
Did I mention you could drink at home?
Right.
Yes, yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
you think of when you raise the paddle to give money and someone gives it that highest level, and you feel the warmth in the room rise up, and maybe that doesn't push you to that stretch level when you're at home because you don't have that. So that's tricky. But we did find ways. We did porch drops. So we had a little gift collection for people, and we drove around town and left a gift bag on their porch before the event. And we really have to be diligent about the follow-up. You have to make sure they're getting that letter in the mail and the thank you email, and you're connecting in some way to get their feedback and to make sure that they know that they're valued. And it can be done. And a lot of organizations did it. By the time organizations at Spring this year, they perfected it a little bit more, where, I was part of a virtual trivia night that was a lot of fun. So it was replacing a big, like 500 person trivia night. And it's hard to recreate that on Zoom, but companies have sprung up that have really mastered that experience and found ways, even when people are apart, to create the sense of togetherness you need. So those opportunities are out there. And I can't sit here and say they'll raise as much money as having people in person, because typically it's just the reality is they won't. But the most important thing to take away from an event isn't the money, it's the connections. Getting to meet people and giving people the opportunity to bring their network in to see your cause is something that, if you play your cards right, will benefit your organization for years to come. So you can find ways to sort of imitate that part of it, even if it isn't what we're used to.
What's the most important thing when you're trying? Is it pulling heartstrings, like getting people emotionally connected, or is it showing a difference, or is it both? Like, hey, your money went to help, you'll see, I don't know, some animal one, and they'll give you the animal, and you adopt an animal, and you get to see the
Sarah McLachlan music in the background.
tiger grow. And anyway, but is it important to do both? Like have this emotional connection where, there's sadness and then happiness that you're helping create change. And then also, isn't it just as important then that follow up is, hey, you did create, these are the facts And this is how
Yeah.
these things is sort of a two-part. Is one more important than the other?
I always like to think of it as a balance between pathos and logos for people, because you do want the story. People are human beings. And if you just come in with numbers and statistics, there's a certain portion of the population that will respond to that. But for the most part, nothing gets to people quite like hearing the stories, and especially hearing from people who've been impacted by the work. If you can say, here's so-and-so who came to us, this is going on in their lives, and here's the tangible difference that was made to them. But there is that logical side also of, here are the statistics on what we've accomplished. We served this many people, and our goal in the year ahead is to serve this many more. If, for instance, my last full-time fundraising job before I became a consultant was at a mental health agency, and we had hard data to point to of improvement in symptoms of depression and suicidality among youth. And that always just like jumped out to people like, wow, I can literally say I'm saving lives if I give money to this group. And that just, those numbers can reinforce that feeling that good needs to be done. And also I'll add too, that kind of underpinning the whole thing is giving the emotional and the logical appeal from a point of strength. And by that, I mean, not saying a lot of organizations fall into the trap of putting the need out there of, we're struggling, our budget's tight, we don't know how we're going to keep the lights on, please help us, this is so important. And that only works to a certain point, because giving is an act of love. I like to remind people that philanthropy translates to love of humanity. Any kind of philanthropy is an act of love, but it's also investing. You don't want to, if someone, especially if they want to give, say, $5,000 to a cause, saying we don't know if we're going to be here next year isn't the most compelling reason to go write a big check.
Give us the money. We're not going to be here in 2 years.
Right. And okay, I'm going to give you this check to keep the lights on, but once you spend it down, are you going to be in the same spot? So letting people know your ambitions of, our vision is we want to end hunger in our community, or we want to make sure that everybody fighting cancer has access to treatment. And here are the steps we're going to take to get there, because people click with that, and it's no less appealing emotionally, but it's inspiring, and it's something that lets them say, all right, yeah, I can get behind this. This is worth my money, and my money's actually going to do some good with that.
Is the messaging important?
Well, I was thinking of bringing back the Jerry Lewis telethon, but I'm not sure that would work under these situations. But I mean, so would something like that still be effective in today's environment?
I do know, and actually, I do think the Jerry Lewis telethon still goes on in some places.
Oh, really?
Well. I think so. I could be wrong, but I do think I read something about that. It has its place. I don't necessarily think. I would hesitate to say it could never work if someone wanted to start one up, but I think there are better ways probably. I think that was well suited to the era when it kind of had its heyday, but I think that type of fundraising has kind of shifted into the peer-to-peer space.
So what I was getting at is the messaging, like we say, give because we're going to end breast cancer. Well, we've been given for cancer for decades, and cancer's not ending. We're not curing cancer. I have a whole other theory about that. You don't even go down there, but can you say something too big, like ending hunger? Are we really going to end hunger? Should you be very more actionable about, hey, they're not going to cure cancer, because every time there'll be a new cancer that pops up, even if they happen to cure one finally. I think they are actually curing leukemia, which is a really big deal with gene therapy. So we're finally getting to some cures, but it feels like the mission can be so big sometimes that it doesn't seem reasonable. And so they're like, you're not going to really do that. So my money feels like it's not going to, would it be better to say we're going to, help women, we're going to help them with this, or help men or survivors with X, Y, Z? Is it better to be more poignant with a reasonable, actionable, measurable goal that you're going to be able to reach?
Yeah, you can definitely be too big with a vision, because you're right. Like if you say like, we're going to cure cancer, people are going to say, well, okay, yeah, I've heard that before. But I do think it's good to think as big as possible with a vision, then to have a mission statement that really points to how you want to move the world closer to that vision. Because you can say, our vision is for there to be a cure for cancer within the next 30 years. Our mission is to get us there by doing X, Y, and Z. So we're going to fund groundbreaking research, and we're going to fund experimental treatments, and we're going to do these things that will move us closer to this vision, acknowledging that no one organization is going to do it alone, but this group has an idea on how we can get closer to that vision. Even if that's aiming too high, better to aim too high than too low.
Let's say you're Alzheimer's. I read something like Alzheimer's hasn't had a new drug in like a decade or something. Like there's been no new treatment. So if you are an Alzheimer's organization, you might say, hey, listen, our goal, we think Alzheimer's, there'll be game-changing things happening in 10 years or 20 years. But what we plan to do is we want to put, 100 more scientists, on the front lines. And in order to do that type of research, this is what we're looking at, because we really just need more, brain power on the front lines. Is that kind of something what you're talking about?
Have you ever worked in fundraising? Because I like that appeal.
No, I haven't. But
yeah. Absolutely. That's exactly right. When you can say, because you just nailed it, that you can say, we think we have reason to believe this big thing could be achieved. When it's that, saying we're going to have something to treat Alzheimer's is huge. That's life-changing for so many people. But saying, here's the evidence why we think this is actually a possibility, but we think it's going to be easier to get there if we can do X, Y, and Z today. Absolutely. That's the kind of thing that gets buy-in from people, because if I go out and start a nonprofit tomorrow and say I'm gonna cure Alzheimer's, and that's that, no one's gonna trust me to do it, because there's no evidence behind it. There's no rationale other than, got a big heart and want to make a difference with it. But when you can say, we think we can do it, and here are proven steps to get us there, that's going to resonate, and that's going to get some investments.
If you're starting a new organization, how do you gain that public trust? How do you get, like, let's say you're a new startup or a new nonprofit, or maybe you're just a nonprofit that a lot of people don't know about. How do you, is it just like proof is in the pudding? Like you really need to show what you're doing? What would some of the first steps be?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is having some kind of empirical data to show that what you're doing works. Like maybe it's finding a similar organization like yours that you can model yourself off of. Maybe it's research into what you want your programs to be in a way that you can prove the impact of them. Just something that you can take to the community and say, this isn't pie in the sky, this is real stuff. And then getting out there, and it's simple networking. A lot of times it's finding the people in your community who have an interest in it. It's finding the other organizations in the space and getting out and having conversations and seeing, who can you introduce me to? What can you tell me? Where does work need to be done in this issue area? And then letting it happen from there. The job at the mental health agency I was talking about was started by a husband and wife who tragically lost their son to suicide in 2004. And they kind of sat down and said, this can't happen. What we went through can't happen to other families. And they went out and they just networked. They talked to people in the community. They connected with some researchers, with some doctors, with people who were in the mental health profession, and everything kind of evolved from there. And the organization took some turns that they weren't expecting, I think, when they sat around their kitchen table and made it a reality. But they were really responsive to the needs that existed in the community. And when that happens, that's when you get the breakthroughs on funding, and the funding lets you kind of stand up the programs a little bit. Then once you do that, that opens the door to more funding, and then attention in the community, and then more donors, and it kind of snowballs from there. But that startup phase is really tricky because, most people aren't starting a nonprofit with money, and figuring out how do you get the profile you need to get the money and to prove to people that it can be done is tricky. But having evidence and being willing to get out there and be face to face with stakeholders are gonna be the biggest things you can do.
You mentioned something really interesting earlier, and you talked about millennials and how they give, and how it's a little bit different from, or a lot different from. So what is it how do you reach the millennials? How are they giving? Where's this going? What new opportunities do we have?
A lot of people are trying to figure that out right now. So I am a firm believer in peer-to-peer. I think that is the way of the future, because millennials are, I think, hyper aware of how they're being messaged and what people's motivations are behind a message, to the point, and I'm a millennial myself, so I can say this, to the point of being a little cynical and a little guarded when things like that come out. Direct mail used to be a really effective way to drive fundraising. And I think it still works now, but I think within 10 to 15 years, it's going to be a relic of the past. So peer-to-peer really cuts through that because it's a genuine way for not an organization to say, can you give, but for a friend or a family member to say, on behalf of an organization, I care about this, it's making a difference, can you give? Also, events have been big drivers of fundraising in the past, but I took a little heat last month because some people didn't agree with an article I wrote arguing that fundraising galas are going to lose importance as millennials become more prominent, because the data says that they aren't drawn to that kind of event. Not that they're going to go away anytime soon, but events to reach millennials need to be a little more forward thinking than galas are, which can a lot of times be a reflection of what's been done, a celebration of the organization. So the kinds of things that resonate with this generation are more fun, personally engaging, and the kinds of things that really focus around what are we going to do going forward? What can we do to come together and really feel like we're making a difference? Because as a generation, you think of what millennials have been through of, two major financial crises, and came of age during war, and a lot of hardship, and 9/11, yeah, all that stuff. And that really, it's a generation that's really in tune to the need that exists in the world. So any kind of event that's really going to connect with them is going to be the kind that makes them feel like they're doing something to address the need. So the trick with that is those big events drive a lot of major giving, that people will walk away having given $5,000-$10,000 in one night. And it's harder to replicate that outside of the big formal event. So there's going to be a lot of trial and error over the years ahead, where organizations figure out, how can we recreate that with a different generation of donors? But I'm really of the belief that it's going to be all those things I talked about earlier of get in front of them, get a gift, no matter how small, and then build relationships, keep stewarding, keep messaging, keep letting them know that they're crucial investors in a mission, and that as time goes on and as people become more successful, there's going to be a greater inclination to give, and to give in greater amounts down the road.
If anybody wants to get in touch with you and find out more and work with you, more importantly, where do they find you? How do they make this happen?
Right. You can go to our website. It's teamcatandmouse.com. That's cat with a K. Also, my email is ben@teamcatandmouse.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place. I post all the time. I'm probably a little too much at times, but reach out. If you're listening, if you're a nonprofit, if you're struggling to fundraise, you're not alone. Every single nonprofit that has ever existed has been in that position, because it's a very specific discipline, but it's one not a lot of people have training in. And mastering those things and setting your organization up for success can be really challenging. But there's people out there who've been doing it for a long time. And I'm fortunate to have two partners in this business who've been doing it for a long time as well. And we'd love to have a conversation and help you out.
Ben Chambers, Team Cat and Mouse. You've been very informational.
Yeah, that was really good. Thanks for all that great information.
Thanks so much. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you. Here's what I learned. All right. You teach the companies to fish. You don't have to make them a sandwich, or however that goes. Charity with a Y?
No, charity with a D.
Charity with a D.
CHARIDY.
That's what it is. I just wanted to make sure we re-emphasized it. That was my way of making it sound like, yeah. You grow your board of directors. Online trivia nights. I like that idea.
That was cool.
That we should do that. Okay. But the biggest thing.
Wait, who are we raising money for? My shopping sprees?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Just want to make sure. Always raising money for?
Okay. Go on.
Yeah. Face to face, face to face, face to face.
Peer to peer, peer to peer, peer to peer.
Yeah. And don't forget that
it may not always be face to face, because it's online. We may not be face to face
Zoom, but
in this
whatever.
world ever again.
Yeah. But personal connections is what you really got to look into. And charity is an act of love. So give, and give. All right. So that's my, he was very informative, and I actually.
Go hire Ben. He was good.
Hire Ben. That's it. And hire On the Mark Media too.
If you like what you heard today, be sure to follow us on Twitter @On the Mark Media, and that's Mark with a C. If you liked what you heard today, be sure to follow us on Twitter. That's @On the Mark Media, Mark with a C. So you'll know when our latest episodes post. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on Instagram. Also @On the Mark Media, Mark with a C. Those are all Marks with a C forever. The only way to spell Mark.
That's right. Off the Mark with the Bickersteins is a production of On the Mark Media. Until next time, I'm Mark.
I'm Kathy, and we are Bickerstein.